Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Tina Jha. India, the United States, and several other countries have called for calm and restraint amid escalating tensions and violence between Israel and Palestinian militants. At the UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday, India expressed deep concern at the clashes and violence in Jerusalem and called on both sides to avoid changing the status quo on the ground. So today on The Big Picture, we will analyze with experts what has led to the current escalation in this decades-old conflict between Israel and Palestine. Has the ongoing violence raised fears of a war-like situation? And what is the way ahead for peace in the region? To discuss some of these aspects and also much more, I'm joined on the program by two distinguished panelists. Let me first introduce them to you. I'm joined today on The Big Picture by former Ambassador Anil Trigunya. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the program. And Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Foreign Affairs expert. Professor Chaulia, welcome to this edition of The Big Picture. In fact, let me begin the program today with you, Dr. Chaulia. First, let's try and understand the current scenario, what has led to the violence that we saw suddenly exploding on Monday and which has since then caused a massive escalation.
Yeah, Tina, this is very unfortunate spiral. It's linked to the age-old, tussle over identity and land, starting with Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, which is contested area and which the Palestinians hope will become the capital of their yet to be formed state. And there was a threat of eviction of Palestinians from one of the neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, and for that land to be given to Jewish settlers. And from there, it sparked off street clashes around the Aqsa mosque compound, which is the holiest, third holiest shrine for Islam in the world after Mecca and Medina. And that, created the fervor all over the region, as far as Turkey and beyond. Radicals began to call for, defending Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then Hamas, which is in the Gaza Strip, which is a little bit away from Jerusalem and separated by Israeli territory in between the other side of the Palestinian territories, they decided that this was the time to link Gaza with Jerusalem, as they say, struggle now. The other is led by very senile and aging leader Mahmoud Abbas, who's 85 plus now, in Ramallah on the other side in the West Bank. He's unable to fight for the cause as many of them see it. So Hamas is the more radical faction of the Palestinians, and they started retaliating. And then of course Israel always has a way of disproportionately hitting back whenever there is a rocket fire from Gaza into Israeli territory. So that's how this has happened. And if you just draw back a little bit from the details, my reading is structurally there are a couple of issues. One is the political paralysis both within Israel and in the Palestinian territories. The leadership and the governance structure have all ossified. So one side you have Mahmoud Abbas. He keeps saying he will conduct elections. He keeps on postponing. It's more than 15 years now since he has been a so-called president of Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, in the West Bank, but he has not conducted an election. And again, same with the Hamas also has a dictatorial hold, but people are very unhappy because of the Israeli siege and the limitations. So Palestinians are very frustrated. Their leadership, their own internal leadership is not delivering anything for them. So that's why you see a lot of anger and people coming out on the street. Israeli side, 4 elections they've had in last 2 years, inconclusive. Netanyahu remains the prime minister, but in a caretaker form. And they're all highly divided, the Jewish also. And within Israel, the most dangerous now is the Arab Israelis. They're just 20% of the Israel's population, but they identify with the Palestinians. They are essentially of the same ethnic group. So they are Israeli citizens, but they are also moved by what is happening in Jerusalem and what's happening with Gaza. So they have also, some of them have come out for riots. There is a far-right Jewish group that is more aligned to Netanyahu that is now engaging in a so-called civil war-like tactics inside Israel. So it's like the perfect combination of, historical grievances were there, but I think the institutional atrophy and the stagnation of the leadership structures on both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side means that there are too many groups out of control now. And they are now resorting to maximum violence and escalating this.
So when we talk about an international situation, Professor Chaulia, what we heard the United States President say on Wednesday while he was addressing the media was, in fact, he was quite hopeful that the fiercest hostilities in years that have existed between Israel and Palestine might end soon. So what explains this optimism is obviously something that he didn't express very well before the media people, but a lot of speculation since then have begun that is the United States working on a peace plan with other partner countries in the region? Is that something in the offing? And does that explain the optimism behind Joe Biden's hope of ending these hostilities between Israel and Palestine?
Well, Tina, I don't think Biden administration has so much leverage on Israel. You see, because they are trying to be a little more even-handed compared to Trump, who was like, no questions asked, we'll always stand with Israel, no matter what. Not even a pretense of being a neutral broker. And that was how the US was from 2017 to 2020. Now, this new administration, they're saying that they want to be more balanced. They're saying that, they have resumed humanitarian aid for the UN agency UNRWA that was channeling aid to the Palestinians. They have said that, they will try to again revive talks and such things. But I don't think they have invested much diplomatic energies into this conflict. I mean, I think Biden would have preferred that this, like, let sleeping dogs lie. The problem is they've woken up and they're barking and biting. So I think Biden was wanting to pretty much pack up his bags and vacate the Middle East, because like Trump or even more, he wants to reorient to Indo-Pacific and to focus on containment of China and all those issues, which is strategically speaking, grand strategy wise is correct. The problem is the Middle East has this, it's so combustible that it forces the Americans back in, even if they are reluctant and they want to get out. And in this case, I think Biden administration will find it hard to convince Netanyahu. I mean, apparently Biden already talked to Netanyahu, and he asked also to exercise restraint, and also at the same time saying you have a right to defend yourself. So there is an alliance, of course, no doubt, US-Israel alliance, whether it is a Democratic president or a Republican president is there. But there is a base within the US, among the Democratic Party, which is the left wing of the US politics, who are become very disenchanted with Netanyahu and who believe Netanyahu is the root of cause of most of the problems right there, because they look at it as mainly the far right Jewish settlers who are being encouraged more and more by Netanyahu, and that is the crux of the problem, to try and gobble more and more Palestinian land, to try and evict them from whatever little they have left, and to basically annex everything. That is so the left wing or Democratic Party is putting pressure on Biden, saying, how can you just wash your hands off this problem and say, well, we'll see? Or, there is no, the official word in the US government, the State Department is, we don't see any traction among the two principal parties, or the three principal parties, if you like, Fatah, Hamas, and Israel, to actually come to any negotiation. So what can we do about it? So in a way, they were trying to just chicken out of it, but now they've been forced in. And there is pressure within the so-called progressive wing in the US government to do something. So I think what can they do? Well, some people say American taxpayers are footing the bill and giving so much military aid to Israel, billions of aid, and they use that military aid to bomb the hell out of Gaza or East Jerusalem. So how can we do this? We should we should impose conditions on Israel. I don't think Biden is that much of a leftist. Biden is more a centrist. He often recounts that even when his when his grandmother was alive and he was a kid, they used to say at breakfast that come what may, we have to support Israel. So Biden is a kind of a centrist or even right of center on this matter. So on that count, I don't see him how he could come back into the situation and make a difference. No. So maybe more play, and in fact, Ambassador Trigunath may have a view on this. The regional players, Saudi, Qatar, UAE, the ones who got influence with Hamas, especially Qatar and Turkey, maybe even the Russians. Some of them are saying both Hamas and Israeli sides are talking to Moscow. So these kind of players may possibly have a better, pathway than the US right now. I feel the US is struggling to find a policy because of their view that it is better to exit that region. They just don't have the energy or the attention as much as they used to in the past. No?
Professor, what are your thoughts? Because looking at what the future holds, there are complex issues that need to be worked out. So until that happens, the conflict will go on. But What is the hope?
I think the hope really, Tina, I mean, if you ask me, organically, leadership change and generational change in the region is important. I mean, these, Mahmoud Abbas, Netanyahu, they've had their time. I mean, they've been ruling for a long, long, long time now. So I think they should step aside, ideally, I mean, or should be removed. I mean, over time, somebody or the other will have to take over from them. They are both compromised, and in many ways, many people feel like the domestic survival politics, for power, survival, and to hold on to their chairs. That is, overriding the broader interests of their own people or of the region. So that has to happen. I mean, whether they are forced through elections or through some other means or through a judicial inquiry, which is happening with Netanyahu. There's a case, bribery and embezzlement case going on. So all these things, eventually, we should hope for a newer generation to come in and rethink. In fact, the core issue is two-state solution, which many of us are still advocating. The UN advocates for it. India supports it. Many countries, Biden administration is saying again, they have recommitted to a two-state because Trump had abandoned it completely. Now, the problem with all this is, you see, the ground sentiment has also changed. There are surveys of the Palestinians themselves. A majority are saying they no longer want any two-state solution because it's fragmented, it's broken up. They don't even know what it means. Who will rule a Palestinian state? Will it be Hamas or Fatah or neither of these? And they are geographically also separated by Israeli territory. So it's not a viable state anymore. And on top of it, the settlements, more land seems to be going into the Jewish hands. That is why there's so much anger and frustration on the Palestinian side. So it's like a creeping kind of a. So what started 1948 with the Al-Nakba, as they call it, when they were thrown out with the creation of Israel, and then 1967 they lost some more, and now again East Jerusalem they're losing some more. So there is that, and then jihadist groups are there worldwide. Ambassador was talking about how this can fuel terrorism worldwide. Remember, there is ISIS and Al Qaeda and all these groups. They are going to use these images of Al-Aqsa Mosque and use it to whip up, hardline jihadist sentiment around the world against other targets. So this is a big problem. So I would think that the generational change has to come. Arabs and Israelis within Israel, that 80% and 20%, the Jewish and the Arabs, we need to have some kind of a Israeli identity to come forward, because otherwise it's looking more and more like what the critics on the left and the human rights group call it. This is an apartheid regime. So it's getting more and more extreme, but sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better. So I think that's the key, from the ground up leadership. And then, of course, the regional players. If Iran-US nuclear deal goes ahead and comes back, maybe that will moderate the Iranians, and that in turn will help to moderate Hamas. Maybe that's, I'm thinking through, logically, step by step. And then Qatar and Turkey are also backing Hamas. So Iran, Qatar, Turkey, these three. And then on the other side, if, the Saudi and UAE, which are now basically almost de facto allies of Israel, if they also prevail saying, it's better to tamp down the tensions because Israel needs stability. And right now they have no government, no functional government for more than 2 years. So I think maybe pragmatism will prevail. I hope there will not be a land invasion of Gaza. I don't think Israel will want to go back to the old scenario of before they gave up Gaza, when Ariel Sharon gave up Gaza, because administering Gaza is going to be impossible directly. So they better leave it, and same with the West Bank. So ultimately, I think the fighting will stop. There's no question of the fighting stopping, but it's like what they call, intermittent, every few months or every year or so, again, you will see a resumption of this until there is organic change. International community, I feel, less and less capable of fixing the picture, but some effort has to be made. Otherwise, the bloodshed is quite bad, and the radicalization threat is tremendous.
Thank you once again to both my guests for joining me on the program, putting your thoughts across before us and our viewers. Pleasure having you on the show.